Welcome back to the Key Safety Talks YouTube channel. We are so glad you are joining us for another safety conversation. And we are not just listening here, we're watching. So utilize this video and audio to its full potential to make sure those safety tips really sink in. And make sure to hit subscribe because we're coming at you with these safety insights every single day. Now, today's subject might not seem like the most exciting thing at first glance, but it's safety training.
You're right on the money with that one. It's easy to see it as just another box we need to check. We know that's not the case at all, because this stuff can literally be the difference between a smooth day on the job and, a real disaster.
Exactly. And that's why we're here. We're not just here to tell you that safety training matters. We're going to dive into the why, the how, and even how to prove its worth to the people who sign off on the budgets.
Because sometimes those budget conversations can be tougher than the training itself.
Okay, so to kick things off, let's look at a real-world situation that really highlights how crucial this is. Let's talk about an oil field services company. They thought they were covering all their bases. They just gave their workers this huge safety manual and had them sign a waiver. No actual training, no tests, just, a stack of papers and a signature.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that so many times. The classic sign and forget approach. And let me tell you, it's a recipe for trouble, because legally, a company can't just wave away their responsibility to properly train workers.
Right, and here's where it gets really interesting with this company. They had an incident where a worker was injured because he didn't follow the correct procedures. And the worker claimed he had read the manual, but he didn't actually understand it.
See, that's where things get complicated. Because in a situation like that, the courts are going to look at whether the company actually took all the reasonable steps to make sure that worker understood the information. And just a signature on a waiver, that's not going to cut it.
So this company ended up learning a very expensive lesson. They ended up paying way more in fines and legal fees than they would have spent on doing the proper training in the first place.
Exactly, and it really highlights a crucial point. Safety training is about so much more than just avoiding fines. We need to think about the human cost. It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking, I've been doing this job for years, I know what I'm doing. But that complacency can be dangerous.
It's like thinking you're a pro at riding a bike.
Yeah.
And then completely forgetting how to use the brakes.
Yeah, exactly. And the statistics back this up. Almost 25% of workplace injuries happen to experienced workers.
Wow. So a quarter of the workforce getting hurt, despite their experience. That should make all of us stop and think, no matter how long we've been on the job.
It should.
That's a huge number. I mean, you would think that experience would equal safety. But it seems like that's not always how it works.
Well, sometimes it boils down to those mental shortcuts we develop over time. We might think, I can save a few minutes here if I skip this step or do things a little bit differently. But those shortcuts can be risky.
So what we're really saying here is that training can't just be a check-the-box exercise. It has to actually change how people think and work.
Exactly. It's about giving workers the knowledge and skills they need to do their job safely. But it's also about verifying that they really absorb that information. It's like the difference between reading a cookbook and actually knowing how to cook a meal. You need both the knowledge and the practice.
I know, I could relate to that. I remember this one time I was handed this 200-page safety manual. And he said, okay, go learn this. It was just overwhelming. I'm sure I didn't retain even half of it.
That's a common experience, unfortunately. And that's why we need to rethink how we approach training. It needs to be engaging, relevant, and really tailored to the workers and their specific roles and tasks.
And most importantly, it has to go beyond just showing up. We need to test whether people can actually do what they've learned, not just whether they were present for the training session.
You got it. It's about proving competency, not just attendance. Because in the end, effective training is investment in your workforce's well-being and an investment in the success of your business.
I think this is a good time to pause for a second and ask our listeners, what have your training experiences been like? Were you set up for success? Did the training actually give you the tools and the confidence you needed to work safely? Just think about that for a minute as we move into the next part of our discussion, where we'll get into some really practical tips for making safety training truly effective. We'll be right back.
Okay, so let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how to actually make safety training really work. Our source material outlines 6 key steps to building a program that makes a real difference.
Yeah, let's break those down. I'm all ears. Our listeners at home are probably taking notes too, hopefully not while they're operating heavy machinery.
Safety first, always. So step 1, is all about really figuring out what needs to be taught. And this is where a thorough risk assessment comes in. We need to identify those potential hazards for each job or task.
Okay, so we're not talking about some generic one-size-fits-all program. It's about getting super specific to those risks.
Exactly. Once you really know the hazards, then you can figure out what competencies workers need to have to handle those risks. This might be things like, using personal protective equipment the right way, knowing how to safely handle hazardous materials, or being prepared to respond in case of emergency.
Got it. So step one is all about identifying the what of the training. What are those essential skills and that essential knowledge? Okay, so what comes next?
Step two is all about the how. How are we going to actually teach all this stuff? And this is where you can get creative and think about what methods are going to resonate best with your team.
So we're not just talking about death by PowerPoint here.
Definitely not. You might use a mix of lectures, hands-on demonstrations, interactive simulations, even online modules. The key is to choose methods that are engaging and that match all the different learning styles out there. Because some people learn best by doing, others learn by listening. So you really want to cater to those different needs.
I love that. Make it interactive, make it fun, make it stick. Okay, what about step three?
Step three is all about the who. You need to have skilled trainers. It's not enough to just put anybody in front of the group and hope for the best.
Right, like that history teacher we all had, who just droned on and on from the textbook.
Exactly. Trainers need to be really passionate about safety. They need to understand the material inside and out, be able to communicate clearly, and make the training relevant to the people in the room.
Okay, step three, find that passionate, engaging trainer who really knows their stuff. All right, what's next on the list?
Step four is about giving workers the chance to actually practice what they've learned. This could be role-playing, simulations, or even supervised practice on the job.
Oh, this makes so much sense. It's like learning to drive. You wouldn't just read the driver's manual and then hit the road.
You got it. Hands-on practice builds confidence, and it builds that muscle memory so that workers can react instinctively in real-life situations.
All right, we're on a roll. Step five, what's the focus here?
Step five is about evaluating how well the training is working. Did it actually achieve its objectives? Do the workers now know what they need to know? And can they actually put that knowledge into action on the job?
So we're talking quizzes, tests, observations, that kind of thing.
Yes, you can use a bunch of different methods to check learning and competency. The important thing is to make sure that the evaluation actually aligns with the training goals and that it provides useful feedback, both to the worker and the trainer.
And last but not least, step six, lay it on us.
Step six might not be the most exciting part, but it's super important. Documentation. We need to keep those records of who attended the training, what was covered, when it was delivered, and how everyone did on the assessments.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm a huge believer in keeping good records, receipts, training certificates, you name it. It's always good to have that paper trail.
Absolutely. In the world of safety, good documentation really proves that you're doing your due diligence so that if an incident does happen, you can show exactly what training was provided. And that can be really important legally.
So it kind of protects both the worker and the company. And it also helps keep the training consistent and make sure that you're meeting any legal requirements.
Right. Now, we've talked a lot about how to make training effective, but, sometimes even with the best training, things can go wrong. And sometimes those incidents can have some pretty devastating consequences.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought. Our source material actually includes a couple of case studies from WorkSafe BC. That's British Columbia's Workers' Compensation Board. And they investigated what went wrong in a couple of really serious incidents.
These cases are tough to read about, but they're really important reminders that safety isn't just about checking boxes. It's about protecting people's lives.
So let's talk about that first case. It involves a young worker at a mill who ended up with severe burns while he was using a torch to repair some logging equipment.
In this case, the worker hadn't been properly supervised or given instructions on how to safely handle this flammable cleaning liquid he was using to prep the equipment for the repair. Really dangerous combination.
So lack of both supervision and task-specific training.
Exactly. And to make matters even worse, the company didn't even have any written instructions for how to safely repair that piece of equipment. This just highlights how critical it is to have clear communication, thorough training, and close supervision, especially for younger or less experienced workers.
It's heartbreaking to think that with the right training and the right oversight, this could have been prevented. Okay, so what about that second case?
This one involves a worker at a foundry who was actually crushed by a heavy mold that fell from a crane.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying. What went wrong there?
So the investigation found a number of failures. The company hadn't enforced the rule that workers should never stand or pass under a suspended load. I mean, that's like safety 101.
So a lack of awareness even of the most basic safe work practices.
Yes, and to make things even worse, the hook that was being used to suspend the mold hadn't been properly certified, and the worker hadn't been trained on the hazards of working with those kinds of suspended loads. So a whole series of oversights that led to this tragedy.
These cases really drive home the point that training needs to be really comprehensive. It's not just about the immediate task at hand. It's about understanding the potential hazards of the equipment, the environment, everything.
Absolutely. These stories are just really painful reminders that safety training is not just a box to be checked. It's an ongoing commitment to protecting our workforce.
We've covered a lot of ground here. From the steps of building a good training program to those very real consequences of when safety fails. But there's one big piece of the puzzle we haven't tackled yet. How do we convince the folks who hold the purse strings that investing in safety training is actually good for business? We'll dive into that when we come back. Okay, we are back, and it's time to talk about that elephant in the room, the return on investment, or as the cool kids say, the ROI of safety training. How do we actually prove to those higher-ups that putting money into safety isn't just the right thing to do ethically, but it's also really smart business?
That's the big question, isn't it? Sometimes safety training is seen as just a cost and not as something that adds value.
Right. But we know that's not true. Preventing those accidents saves companies a ton of money in the long run. I mean, just think about it. Lost productivity, medical bills, insurance premiums, legal fees, damaged equipment, not to mention the impact on the worker who is injured and their families. It really adds up fast.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect. It can really impact the whole organization. So how do we put an actual dollar figure on the value of safety training? Well, our source material outlines this 5-step process for conducting a training ROI study.
Okay, I am here for it. I love a good data-driven argument. Walk me through it.
Okay, so step 1 is to actually survey those workers who went through the training and, get their feedback on the quality of the training, how effective they felt it was, and how it's impacted their job performance.
So go straight to the source, the folks who actually experienced the training.
Exactly. Then about 60 days after the training, you do a second survey to see if those initial responses are holding up and to gather some more insights.
Okay, makes sense. Give folks a little time
to
put what they've learned into practice.
Right. Okay, so what's next? Step 3 is all about crunching those numbers. From the survey, we're looking for those patterns and trends to understand how the training really affected things like worker competency, productivity, and those safety outcomes.
So we're basically looking for hard evidence that the training actually made a difference.
Exactly. Then in step 4, you got to calculate the total cost of the training program. That includes things like trainer fees, materials, administrative costs, and even the cost of worker time that's spent in training.
Okay, so you had a clear picture of the investment side of the equation. What about the benefit side?
That's step 5, calculating the ROI and other key metrics.
Right, this is the juicy part. How do we actually do those calculations?
So the basic formula for ROI is pretty straightforward. It's the financial benefit minus the cost of the training, all divided by the cost of the training.
So if the benefits outweigh the costs, you've got yourself a positive ROI, meaning the training paid for itself, and then some.
Exactly. And you can also calculate things like the monetary benefit per worker, the benefit to cost ratio, and even how long it takes to actually recoup that initial investment.
Wow, so much good data. It sounds like this information could be really powerful when you're trying to make that case for safety training.
Absolutely. When you take this kind of data to management, you can really show them that safety training isn't just a box to check, it's a smart move that can actually boost their bottom line.
So we've talked about a lot today, why safety training is so important, how to make it really work, and how to show its value to the people who control those budgets. But in the end, it really comes down to people. It's about creating a culture where everyone goes home safe at the end of the day.
It really is. And it's about giving workers the knowledge and the skills to protect themselves and their colleagues.
So as you go about your day, we really want to challenge you to think about safety in your own workplace. Are there things that could be improved? Are there ways to enhance those training programs? Or maybe reinforce some safety protocols? Because even those small changes can really make a big difference when it comes to preventing incidents and creating that culture of safety. And remember, we're here to help. Subscribe to the Key Safety Talks YouTube channel for daily insights and conversations about making our workplaces safer. We are all in this together. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.